Let's be honest. How many times have you worked your tail off, only to watch someone else, someone less qualified, less experienced, get the promotion, the recognition, the raise? It's infuriating. It makes you question everything. Is it me? Am I missing something? But here's the kicker. You are missing something. And it's not because you're not good enough. It's because there are invisible rules at play. Rules that no one ever tells you about. And if you don't know them, you're at a disadvantage before you even step into the room. Today, we're pulling back the curtain. This episode is going to challenge what you think you know about career success. We'll expose the hidden expectations, the coded language, the unwritten rules that determine who moves up and who stays stuck. And trust me, some of this will shock you. Why do certain people seem to navigate their careers so effortlessly, while others, no matter how hard they work, hit invisible walls? Why are brilliant, ambitious professionals overlooked, mislabeled, or dismissed as not leadership material? And most importantly, what can you do about it? That's exactly what we're unpacking today with Dr. Anna Kallschmidt, an industrial organizational psychologist who has spent years researching the real barriers to career success. Coming from a working class background herself, she's seen firsthand how workplace norms and unspoken expectations favor some and shut out others. Her research has revealed 8 critical unwritten rules that dictate professional success, whether you realize it or not. And if you don't understand how they will work against you. So, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or just plain stuck, this conversation is your wake-up call. Because career success isn't just about talent or hard work. It's about knowing the game and knowing how to play it. By the end of this episode, you'll see workplace dynamics in a whole new light. You'll learn how to spot the hidden rules in your own career, and most importantly, how to use them to break through, not break down. So buckle up. This is a conversation you can't afford to miss.
Hello, Dr. Anna Kallschmidt. It's so great to have you on the show. I think this is beautiful timing for us to talk with all the things that are happening nowadays. And so we're just going to jump right in.
What are you talking about? I'm in DC. Is something happening outside?
No, not much. So success isn't just about hard work. We know that. All us women, we keep our heads down. We work so hard. There's all these unwritten rules that we're not always aware of as to who advances and who doesn't. And from your research, which I'm really interested in having our audience hear, and I want to hear, what are some of the most powerful unwritten rules that tend to exclude marginalized in their backgrounds?
Yeah. So I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. So nobody knows what that is, but I basically research all the human factors at work and the impact they have on people in business. And my lens that I started researching in is through class, but class in America is very tricky and it's very race and gender dependent. So I researched the unwritten rules of work for people from working class backgrounds, and I looked at race and gender differences throughout my research. I continue to, and I've recently started looking at neurodivergence as well. So far I have 8 groups of rules that I speak about, train, research, etc. And the most important, so the one that gets everyone's attention, the one that when I'm giving speaking engagements, I see people like nod and like even roll their eyes, is indirect communication.
Indirect.
And
okay.
That's especially tricky for women, especially women of color. So as you shift and you move up in workplace environments, as you experience, trying to do the American dream, right? Moving higher in class, they shift from direct communication to indirect communication. And this is a class difference largely because in more blue collar environments, even some pink color, direct communication can save lives. You don't tell somebody, excuse me, Frank, I don't want to intrude, but it appears the wall is unstable. And if it doesn't bother you and I really don't want to step on your toes, I suggest that you kindly move to the side, right? You don't talk like that. You say, Frank, get the hell out of the way. The wall's coming down, right? And is Frank going to be mad at you? No, you just saved his life, right? While in white collar, you're usually not dealing with immediate life and death. I would say immediate because we all know Boeing, we've been keeping an eye on them for a couple of years now, right? But that's not happening in their offices. So you're less worried about the immediate life-saving impact. However, you're also trying to preserve relationships. The point of indirect communication is to try to preserve relationships and social harmony, not have any conflict. Problem with that is that's impossible. I always ask people, anybody in here have a conflictless marriage? And there's maybe one jokester who's like, yeah, me, right? And everybody knows that they're lying because we all know that's not possible.
Right.
A relationship without conflict, not, toxic, harmful, constant conflict, but without any conflict is not authentic.
Right.
So also half the world uses direct communication. A lot of cultures from Africa use direct communication. A lot of cultures from South America use direct communication. And then my research has added that within classes, the working class use more direct communication because that's what a lot of their jobs require. And it's socialized in their homes. And because in the US, our school systems are built around zip codes and property taxes, right? So the schools tend to be also using similar class cultures. And then if you go to college or a white collar environment, you're like, what did they just say? Or why don't they trust me? And that's where you can't avoid conflict because somebody from a direct culture, they ask you a question and you go around the gamut. They're like, what did I do to lose your trust? Like, why don't you want me to succeed? Why don't you want to answer my question? And so that runs into a conflict. And then you have that double bind, right, of women, where if a woman's too direct, she's a bitch, right? And so that's very difficult for women from working class backgrounds of maybe they've been in a more direct environment. It still had gender roles, but then now you're moving, and it's like the gender role amplifies, right? Of like, now I have to be indirect, especially because I'm a woman.
Right.
And if I'm a woman of color, then there's the extra, she's angry, right? And that can be really tricky. And because communication is everything. I mean, 70% of business leaders say their number one problem is communication. Communication is never 100% and it always is two-way, right? Yeah. So when you do indirect communication, the burden is on the recipient to interpret it. Right. When you do direct communication, you're taking ownership of the burden of communication.
Yeah.
And so you could have a misstep there of they're expecting you to interpret or vice versa. And when that's not clear on what the standard is, you just have confused people.
Right. So now we have both cultural and also class differences that can create these barriers. Can you give another? I think this is a really good example for people. Can you give another example where people maybe misunderstand each other and it impacts their career growth?
Of the same rule?
Yes, of a rule that is
of a new
written.
Okay. Well, I make the argument that class is a culture because it impacts how we behave, the resources we have, what schools we go to, etc. The other one that's also hard for women is the shift to independence. So working class communities grow up more interdependent, and also communities of color tend to be more interdependent. And within race and classes, women are expected to be more interdependent, more communal than everyone else, because you're a bad woman if you only care about yourself, right? Well, if a man is very independent, well, he shows leadership potential, right? So they call that the double bind of if you are communal and as in nurturing, other-centered, kind, etc., you're a good woman. However, if you're more agentic, showing decisiveness, being direct, etc., then you're a good leader. So the double bind is that women are either perceived as not ladylike, which is not likable, or not leadership material. Right. Well, that is not a bind that men have. So there's another class layer there as well, because when you grow up with limited resources, you share them. Right. But then that's not the case for like the higher classes. They have their own resources. They don't have to share them. And they're more focused on maintaining their status and maybe creating something new, creating a new business, what is your idea? What makes you unique? All of those things. While the working class is more, how can you help? How are you a member of the community? what do you have to bring to the table versus what somebody else has to bring to the table? And so that is a shift that you'll see the people from working class backgrounds, especially women, when they first start interviewing for these higher status jobs, they'll say we in the interview. And then so the interviewer often hears freeloader, right? And they're not saying they're not saying I did this, I led that, etc. But the bind women get into is we're not liked when we say I. You see what I mean? Well, she seems very self-absorbed, and that's not what a good woman is. So that can also be tricky for women who move up and need to leverage the individualism to fit into this competitive individualistic environment. But you can't lose the lady card without a cost. But if you never get out of it, then you're never going to move up either. So
how do you reconcile that?
I encourage my clients to do cultural blending on always combining an I with a we. I am so proud of the team that I led. I think I am really looking forward to contributing based on my skills to your effort, mission, etc. to try to blend those things. But it's definitely, it's a convoluted double Dutch game.
For sure. So now when we're in this particular political age that we're in, or time period that we're in, we talk about marginalized or non-traditional folks, and now you're mixing in culture. How should we look about or define these groups that need to be aware of these particular hidden rules that you're talking about? If they're different groups that really...
So the thing with marginalization, the opposite of that is privilege. And if you're marginalized or privileged, is always contextual. It always depends on the context that you're in. And so, from my opinion, you are marginalized if you are in a situation where the rules were written when you weren't there, or anyone who came from your culture and looks like you. In the American workplace, that's anyone who is not a wealthy white man. I mean, and you could go through and who's not an immigrant and who's apparently straight and all of those things, right? Because what we've seen throughout American history is places have been forced to let other groups in. Like the original Ivy Leagues were just for men, right? And that's all of the workplaces too, for paid labor, because women and people of color have always worked, right? It's the paid labor has always been for that group. It has been, we'll let you in, but you have to act like one of us. You have to play by our rules. And so anybody who that's not already naturally part of who they are, that is a level of marginalization. Now, the degree to which you are marginalized can vary. I do not have the same experiences in a workplace when I walk in as a Black woman, for example, or a lesbian woman, or a visibly disabled person. So a lot of people turn that into a competition. But you can also just see it as a point of connection of we have all these identities that happen at the same time and they make us different. But then there are also several points of connection that we can have as well.
Yeah. That clarifies a lot of things in my mind, for sure. So as we're looking at, and I keep mentioning this political age with DEI programs being cut, professionals from non-traditional backgrounds are losing their support. What do you see as the biggest impact of these political shifts on career advancement and belonging in the workplace?
Well, the immediate impact we're seeing is people calling everyone who's not a white man a DEI hire. That's different than someone who was hired to do DEI. And that shows a lot of the labor that people who were hired for one role but expected to do all the extra DEI work for free have been carrying for a long time, right? But just because someone was hired who doesn't look like anybody pre-1960 in a workplace doesn't mean that they were giving preferential hiring. The only people in the federal government who've had explicitly preferential hiring, like they're actually rated higher, are veterans and people with documented disabilities from a medical physician. They do get extra points in the application. So that's the immediate impact I see is like, for example, at the end of January, we had that terrible crash at the DC airport, right? It was immediately blamed on DEI and people were dunking on that the pilot was a woman. And then it came out that she was a trainee and who was actually facilitating that was a white man. And then it went from being a DEI problem to an accident. And that's the issue, is that, like, yes, a mistake was made. They also had one air traffic controller when there should have been two. And I really feel for that air traffic controller. I cannot imagine being put in a position where you're 50% down and a mistake like that happens. Like, truly. And not to, of course, the families and the victims. But that's the difference, is that when you are part of the generic group that is accepted, and again, that depends on the context, because people like to argue with me, well, what about Japan, right? Do you still have white privilege in Japan? That's a different context, right? But you're given the benefit of the doubt when you're part of the majority that it was just a mistake and not because of who you are.
Right.
So that's the immediate impact. The long-term impact, it'll impact business, because we know homogenous teams don't perform as well as heterogeneous ones. They don't. And that doesn't mean that the heterogeneous teams are not qualified.
Right.
So to assume people are not qualified because they are different means you assume that only one group is really qualified for anything. That's whatever ism is associated with that person, right? That if you only think men, if you only think white people, if you only think straight people, whatever, that's the problem. Everybody is usually required to go through the same hiring process. Now you have nepotism, of course, right? But when I'm designing hiring systems, everybody's required to go through the same process. So if that is not the case, then there's a problem with that process and not necessarily the people who applied for the job.
Exactly.
The homogenous teams don't perform as well. They still have to be qualified, but people who are different make better decisions and catch mistakes more. So I think we will see business not doing well as well. I think we're going to see, with AI going in there, we're already seeing those massive mistakes being made at the federal government level. Like, they seem to be control effing up the government right now, literally. Did you see they're getting rid of, in the effort to squelch DEI, they're getting rid of, I think it was a war memorial, I forget where it was, in a museum or something, where somebody was named, their last name was gay. And they were getting rid of it because it fell into DEI, but it wasn't even an LGBTQIA reference. That's why, like, control effing up the government. I was like, I guarantee you, AI was coded to find anything that used the word gay, and that fell into it, right? And I worry that business and the government are going to be making those kinds of mistakes. I'm not anti-AI. I use AI, but when you don't have any
double checks,
checks or anything else, you look dumb.
You make
people don't
dumb
want
mistakes.
You make dumb decisions. And I think we have an opportunity to use AI, because I talk to so many people who are in leadership who have been like, I want to be a better leader. I don't have the time to build the relationships like I should. And I think AI is an opportunity for us to speed up some of the admin stuff that can be done quickly, to really focus on building those relationships that actually help you be successful and help you keep people, so you're not wasting money and turnover. But that is not how the mindset of American work culture has been. It has always been more and more and more and more and more. But if we're doing more and control effing up everything, you're going to control F up your bottom line.
And, the other thing is, I see that the companies that don't buy into, we're not changing our stance on DEI, I see them getting ahead of...
Well, everybody loves Costco. Like, people are buying Costco memberships who, like, don't even have Costco access. It's hilarious.
Yeah, for sure. So before, you were talking about how you'll put into place different hiring systems that exclude the bias, I'm assuming. How do you think having a system that is more merit-based will help who actually gets ahead?
So evidence-based hiring is very important. And honestly, in my experience, and there's a lot of data to back this up, the federal government does it better than corporate. And that's part of because what is being put in the limelight right now, that it's hard to fire a federal employee. But the misstep is they can be fired for performance violations, but they can't just be fired at will. So, and that's what most of America is sadly not used to, is they're not used to being hired to be kept, and they're not used to being fired for a fair reason. Not saying the federal government never makes an error. Absolutely not. But everybody who's not a political employee usually has to go through a hiring system. So there are techniques that can be applied to reduce hiring bias. I don't know that anything can ever be eliminated because humans, we're just wired away, right? But there are several steps that can be made and several techniques to reduce it, but it is not the default. The default is not merit for anybody doing a performance or hiring evaluation because we all have similarity bias. We all are going to like people more who are like us.
Yeah.
And even you may say, well, no, I have my one Black friend, right? That I really like them. Cool. And you probably like them because you have something in common.
Yeah.
Right? Like it doesn't always have to be race, gender, etc. But those are the two that are instantly visible when you see somebody most of the time. Of course, there are like ethnically ambiguous people or androgynous people, but those are the two that really stand out right away. So we have two solutions then. If most people in like executive level power are white men, which is just a fact, right? And a lot of them, because they're older now at this point, came into power or started their way up before Jim Crow laws were banned, before women were allowed to have bank accounts, before, all of those things. We have two options. We could get rid of all of them and, quotarize what represents America, and then they all hire based on their similarity biases. And finally, we have more representation. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen, right? But I think that's what people perceive the DEI efforts were, affirmative action, etc. So the other alternative is that we find a way to get rid of the similarity bias or to reduce it. And there are evidence-based practices for that. That's one of the main focuses of my field, industrial organizational psychology. And a lot of it comes down to what are the tasks we actually need to do on this job? What are the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics? How are we measuring it? Are we measuring it accurately? And how do we reduce the bias in the people who are rating the performance, both at the interview and throughout the job performance? And there's decades of research on this. This is not just a response to the Trump administration. Like this has been something that has been researched for decades because it's so important. Because I tell people all the time, even if you're a jerk, hiring the right person saves you money.
Yeah.
And the productivity, and if they don't leave. I mean, I have never worked somewhere that measured the cost of their turnover. It's just, nope, we're just not going to look at that. We're going to look at every way we can save on taxes, but we're not going to look at how much our people costs are. And that's a lot of money.
Yeah. I would imagine that. Is it very difficult to get rid of that bias or even convince people to look at the bias that they are using when they hire people or even review people?
The techniques themselves are not hard. They can take time because you have to really get in there and understand what the job is and what is needed. The hard part is convincing the leaders to let go. Not let go of everything. Obviously, their business is their baby, but to let go of referring in your cousin isn't gonna fly in this system, right? Or that it's going to be very clear that they were referred in and everybody else had to go through. I was hired once to update a hiring system. I was hired by this small firm that was growing, and they had all been friends along the way, the small group of friends that started a business, but they were growing and they knew they needed to hire people they didn't know. And so I started, making some small changes that would make a big difference. And I noticed they kept telling me, oh, we have a new person for you to interview. I love this person, by the way. Don't tell me that, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's great that you love them, but you're already biasing the other interviewers.
Yes.
Because now, like, especially when you're an executive, I am now pressured to keep the person you like. And they may just have something in common with you that is not job relevant at all.
Right.
Now, the thing is, though, and I do tell people all the time, we need to stop calling things soft skills and start calling them the skills AI can't do. Because there's probably people listening to this who are going to be, yeah, but there are things that aren't task-oriented that are needed on the job. Absolutely. 100% agree with you. But I believe that they should be rewarded, and the fact that they're not is a big part of gender inequality. Because who's expected to do all the teamwork, all the niceness, all the collaboration, and just everything is usually the women.
Yeah.
Right? And who's expected to do all the racial justice efforts? All the people of color. Who's expected to do all the Pride Month stuff is the LGBTQ, right? If it's necessary to make the job happen, if it's necessary to keep the company going, it is work. It's work. And that needs to be considered when you're hiring people of, is this person going to be a team player? Do they have similar values, etc.? But that needs to be talked about before you meet that candidate and on what you would be looking for. What does a team player look like for you in a job relevant way? So that you're not just, this person and I, we'd watch football together.
Yeah.
Therefore, we should hire them.
Yeah. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
So what are some strategies that professionals can do to stand out in interviews or even stand out in the workplace to get ahead when they're dealing with that type of unspoken barrier?
Yeah. Well, I'm a fan of the cultural blending. I think it's also something I noticed I had to do. And this is also very relevant for neurodivergent people, is because so many hiring systems are trash, they ask terrible questions. They don't ask you what they want to hear. And you have to learn the formula for telling them what they want to hear. Now, and I know the purpose of your podcast is to what can people do? What is within their control? But I just want to give the caveat that most of my energy goes towards helping leaders make their workplaces better, because I don't think all the onus should be on the marginalized person. But I know that like the role here is like what's within your control, but I just got to put that asterisk. So the example of a bad question, I remember my first interview out of college, they asked me, are you a good communicator? And I said, yes. What
else are you supposed to say?
I mean, you asked me a question, I answered it, and they were like, okay. And I bombed that interview. I knew I did something wrong. I didn't know what I did. And I still laugh at how I answered those questions. Because at one point, they literally asked me things that were on my resume, like how many students had you taught or whatever. And I said, it's on my resume. Like, how did I not know I was neurodivergent at that point in my life? I really don't. I was like, it's right there. And they didn't like that very much. And I didn't understand why. But as somebody now who's done hiring for like a decade and has like really deep in the science in it, I also can still laugh at myself now and be like, and that was a terrible way to interview. Because they clearly didn't know who I was, what I'd done.
They weren't prepared.
Terrible questions. So what I learned was that for every interview, you need to give an example of the work and the result that it had. The STAR method, the situation, task, action, result, because they likely do not know how to hire. And if you really need that job or really want that job, keep in mind that's a red flag. They probably don't know how to evaluate performance either.
Right.
But two, sometimes you just got to get by. You just got to get your foot in your door. Maybe you'll make their performance system better. You have to take the script from the interviewer without them knowing. So when they ask you, are you a good communicator? You say, yes. And let me tell you about a time that I showed this. The situation I was in was this. The task I needed to do was this. I took these steps and this was the result. And then they're like, wow, I'm doing such a great job interviewing this person. And she's so good. And so once I figured that out, because it can still be disconcerting when they ask questions that are yes, no answers and you have to do more. But just know, like, you're not going to look like a jerk because they do not want to know a yes or no answer. They do want an example. And so what I started doing was every time I interviewed for a job, I went through the job description. And for every bullet point of the skills or the tasks they wanted, I made a star. And I never looked up like what interview questions do they ask, because anybody on the internet could tell you. No matter what they asked me, once I started doing that, I could give them an example of how I was going to show that skill. And it turned to where the control and the interview of the dialogue, the control of the dialogue shifted to me. The decision-making was still on them, but I put my best foot forward when I did that. Because that It's what they want to know.
Yeah.
And why that's poor hiring, though, is anybody can bullshit you. What you really need to rate on is behaviors. And if you don't give them any behaviors, it's really hard to make a decision ethically. So, but one of the behaviors they will be assessing, whether they realize it or not, is your communication. And so when you do it that way, you come across as a concise, you don't want these stars to be longer than 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You need to keep them within 2 minutes. You come up with a concise way to show your value.
Right. Very good. So I do have leaders that listen to the podcast, people in charge of different corporations. What are some final thoughts that, especially during this time that we're in, that you'd like to leave these leaders, and how should they contact you if they want to do a better job hiring?
Man, my biggest message is that there is no neutral culture. Professionalism is not neutral. Professionalism was built around a type of culture where most of us were not in the room. And something I noticed with DEI is when a lot of it is not done well, a lot of it's very performative. And nobody cares if you hang the rainbow flag outside the window if you don't give the gay person a fair chance in hiring, right? Is that because professionalism, the culture of professionalism is so narrow, my research has found that most white men don't even align with it. Even if they're working class or neurodivergent, they may align with it more than a woman and a person of color and all of that. But they're still not happy with it. And we need to reevaluate what that is and how we address these issues, because when we only talk about one group at a time being unhappy with professionalism, then everybody else gets their undies in a bunch saying, well, I'm not happy with it either, but I'm sucking it up, right? And where we throw the baby out with the bathwater is where we don't realize there's a different extent of how harmful this one way of professionalism is, right? It is more difficult for me as a woman to do professionalism because I'm expected to do my hair and my makeup, right? And wear high heels, and a man isn't expected to do those things. But as a white woman, I'm not also expected to have extra hair policing either. So none of us are happy with this, but where we lose it is when we get in a competition about it. So I would say, realize professionalism is not inherently neutral. Don't make it into a competition. Just accept that unwritten rules for you are not invalidated by unwritten rules for somebody else. Don't be discouraged. I am telling all of my clients right now, stay spiteful. Because what we are seeing right now thrives on fear. And what astounds me most about all this is seeing people who I respect cower. Don't give in to that. Stay spiteful. They can't take that from you. It's going to be hard, but the more afraid you are, the more they win.
There you go. It's been so great to have you on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And for contact, I'm pretty easy to find if you can figure out how to spell my last name, which is a challenge. So I have a website, drkallschmidt.com. I'm on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Blue Sky and YouTube. All of my handles are at Dr. Kallschmidt. And yeah, feel free to shoot me a message, and that's it.
And I'll add all that information into the show notes.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
We are officially 1/3 of the way through season 2, wrapping up part 1, the hidden barriers and roadblocks that hold ambitious women back in the workplace. This season has been all about uncovering the invisible rules, the silent forces that shape who gets ahead and who gets left behind. And in this last episode of part 1, Dr. Anna Kallschmidt broke it all down for us. She exposed how workplace culture isn't neutral. It was built for a certain group, and the rest of us have had to learn the unspoken rules as we go. But knowing these rules isn't enough. We need strategies to navigate and challenge them. Here are a few key takeaways from Dr. Kallschmidt's episode. Master workplace communication. Recognize how the shift from direct to indirect communication can impact career growth, and learn how to balance clarity with approachability. Navigate the double bind. Women are expected to be both likable and strong leaders, 2 expectations that often conflict. The key? Pair I with we to demonstrate both leadership and teamwork. Adjust your language to show leadership. Cut out hesitant phrases like I think or maybe. Speak with confidence, even when you're unsure. Understand the power of hidden biases. Hiring, promotions, and leadership decisions are influenced by unspoken cultural norms. Recognizing them allows you to work smarter, not just harder. Strategic self-promotion matters. Too much we language can make your contributions invisible. Frame your achievements in a way that highlights your impact while still aligning with company goals. Stay resilient and strategic. Workplace biases exist, but they do not define your potential. Being aware of them allows you to play the game strategically without losing yourself in it. What's next in Season 2? Now that we've uncovered the roadblocks, it's time to break them down. The next part of Season 2 is all about challenging societal expectations, the rigid ideas about who should lead, how success is defined, and what ambition should look like. I've lined up some incredible guests who will challenge conventional wisdom and show us how to rewrite the rules on our own terms. Because we're not just here to recognize the barriers, we're here to push past them. So, make sure you're subscribed. Share this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and get ready. Because the second part of Season 2 is about to get bold.